Okay, we'll get started. So, when this was presented to me, it was called the Golden Slippers Workshop. And, where does that word golden slipper come from? The book uses a term when you go back out and drink, you slip. And we'll read that when we go in the book. It came out from Canada with this group called the Golden Slippers. And it was a group of about a dozen or so guys, and they could not stay sober. They tried everything possible to stay sober, meetings, rehabilitations, whatever it was, they tried everything and they could not stay sober. They finally went through the book, word for word, sentence for sentence, dictionary in hand, opinions aside, BS aside, and they did the steps the way that they were lined out, in the 1930s. To this day, there's a couple of them left. One died drunk. He froze to death in front of one of the clubs. Every other one that passed away sober, and the ones that are still alive are sober. You can't really hear of odds like that, these days. You don't hear of odds like that. My experience with it, I drank for 17 years and I took it, to institutions, to jails, to inpatients, to outpatients, to insane asylums, to anything. I ended up in a lot of places like that. I tried AA for years. I was in and out for a long time. I did book studies where they read a line and passed the book and shared about the line. I couldn't get this thing. I convinced myself that I was going to die, that I was not going to get this thing. I went all the way to I was in the ICU with liver failure, and the doctor said that I wasn't going to make it out of that hospital because my liver was toast. So I had a Catholic preacher, give me my last rites, and basically said goodbye to my family. And God had other plans. Doctor came in the next day and he said, I don't know what's going on with your numbers, but your liver is starting to heal. And, I survived that. A couple months later, I went out and drank. And that's just a small dose of the power that alcoholism can have for people. I wanted to stop with all my heart. I believed in God my entire life. I could not stop drinking. I knew what would happen every time that I started to drink. I never had one drink in 17 years of drinking. Never. And I always called it like a switch, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. We build up these excuses on how it's going to be better this time, or how I'm going to control it this time. And when I take that drink, all that is out the window. And my entire focus, and the book describes it as delusion, goes right to that next drink. Everything that I, gained momentum for, that was going to help me, this is how it's going to be different this time, was gone. So I understood exactly what happened when I drank. It wasn't the 12th, it was the first. And the drugs, whatever drug I tried, I went right back to drinking. And it's vice versa for, Bill here's in Cocaine Anonymous, and, he would try drinking, but he'd go right back to cocaine. So we all have a drug of choice, and we try to experiment, some of us, with others, but it always gets back to, whatever our drug of choice is. I made a decision. I had lost everything, lost my home, went bankrupt, was basically forced to come back to Colorado Springs. I did most of my drinking in Fort Collins. And I went to a meeting, and I looked inside that window, and I said, I can't do this anymore. I'd gone to hundreds of meetings. I did, so many different kinds of big book studies and, rehabs and like I said, and I was done. And I prepared to die, and I started walking away, and God intervened. And usually he intervenes with alcoholics with another alcoholic. That's why this program is so miraculous. When we start talking to another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope, something happens. Doesn't happen all the time, but usually something happens. And after talking to him in the parking lot for about an hour, I didn't want to drink anymore. I said there had to be something. And I ended up going to a club and met a man there, and he just started doing a workshop. And I was like, what's a workshop? He called it the Golden Slippers. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We go through the book word for word, sentence for sentence, looking words up in dictionary, asking questions, not sharing opinions, just going through it. He said at 17 years sober, he did that for the first time. He's over 40 years sober now, but at 17 years sober, he'd tell you that he didn't have bad recovery, but he was a very angry person. You can meet a lot of people in these rooms if you go long enough that have years of recovery that are very angry and you don't want anything to happen. He wasn't like that. And he, as I got to know him, these workshops saved his life. So I gave it a shot. And like I said, my belief in God was already there. I knew what an alcoholic was, but I had no understanding of what alcoholism is. And there's a reason. We're going to start in the preface. There's forewords. There's the doctor's opinion before we even hit page 1. And then 43 pages, all on step 1. I used to look up at that step and do it in a couple seconds. I know I'm a drunk. Let's move on. I believe in God. Let's move on. It got to that point where it was just get me to the 4th step. The program is 164 pages. So almost a third of it is step 1. There's something in there that I didn't understand about alcoholism, and it explains it thoroughly when you start going through these words, word for word, sentence for sentence. So that's what we're going to do. This isn't a sharing type meeting, but like I said, I want your questions. If I'm reading something and I'm going too fast, I get excited when I start reading this stuff. I really do, because it's saved my life. I've done over 30 of these, and every single one I learned something new. I learned something from you guys, in all of them. If your big book looks like that, nice and clean, that's how mine was, it's going to look like this. I promise you, it should be falling apart after this workshop is done. That's why you have the highlighters. That's why you have the pen. It's for you, because we have this mind that wants to forget. We're going to read this sentence about alcoholism. Remember that we deal with alcoholism. But I have this mind that wants to forget. So that's why we write, we write definitions in here. We write what steps we're on. We write what the words mean. But we're also preparing our book for someone that's going to need your help. If you guys get through this, you're going to take this book to someone else, and that's going to save your life. One of the most powerful things that ever happened to me is I got through my first workshop. I was about 3.5 months sober. And it's like, now what do I do? Guy came in, he had cirrhosis, he had cancer, he was to the point of drinking Aquanet. He was drinking hairspray. He'd been in and out for years and years and years. And the guy that I met that brought this workshop to me, he said, "You're going to sponsor him." I was like, "What are you talking? I can't sponsor anybody. I'm 3 months sober." And he said, "First of all, they don't even use the word sponsor in the book. They don't. They use closed mouth trusted friend. And second of all, you have a book that's highlighted with definitions. You go through that book with him and see what happens." That man died sober. I stayed sober, and that had nothing to do with me. That was God intervening with the big book when I carried that big book to him. And that's what I want all you guys to do. This workshop saved my life. This program saved my life. And we all know people that are struggling. We have people in this room that are struggling now. Just stick with it. There's one thing I can't give you, and that's willingness. But if you stay willing, we're going to read that we need willingness, honesty, and an open mind. But if you stay willing and keep coming back, I promise you this program will save your life. It saved mine, because I was out of answers. I wanted to die. And there's people in this room I know that were at the same point, but yet, we're here. There's people in this room that have done several workshops, which it's awesome to see them back again. So, all right, enough of babbling. We'll go right to everybody has a highlighter, everybody has a pen. We'll go to the preface. Doesn't matter what edition you have. Everybody probably has a 3rd or a 4th edition. And like I said, we'll start at the preface. Did anybody ever start at the preface when they first got this book? Good. I didn't. I went right to page 1. because everything before page 1 couldn't be important. It turns out to be it's some of the most important information in the book. So especially the doctor's opinion. We won't get to the doctor's opinion today, but we will next week. So this is kind of a history, and we'll go to it. Is there any questions before we get started? Okay. Let me get something to drink. This is the 4th edition of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. The first edition appeared in April 1939, and in the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. Your book will have different numbers. The second edition, published in 1955, reached a total of more than 1,150,500 copies. The third edition, which came off press in 1976, achieved a circulation of approximately 19,550,000 in all formats. And when I say start highlighting, that's what you probably should do. You don't have to, but I'm just going to tell you exactly what I have highlighted in my book, so that's how you want to get your book going. So I started highlighting this. Because this book has become the basic text for our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. So circle that word text. The definition of text, you should write right next to that word, is a book to be studied. I would read this book at random, just open it to a certain page and read it, and that's cool. Or I'd use it as a sleep aid, read a little bit before I go to bed, but this is a text. This is something that I need to study. So they're telling me right off the bat what kind of book it is. Our society, so we got that little circle and triangle symbol. And what do those 3 things stand for? Service, unity, and recovery. So I just wrote that symbol right next to society. And notice it says there exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. There is an original manuscript, and we read that at a men's meeting that we go to, but there are certain words that they have changed, but the main core of the 12 steps has been kept intact. The 5th edition is about to come out, but since 1939, in the first 164 pages, nothing has really changed. We'll go over the stuff that has changed, but it's, like I said, it's smaller things. The stories are all different from 1st edition to 4th edition. That's the main difference between the editions, is the stories in the back of the book. The stories in the back of the book have nothing to do with the program of recovery. So that's just people, that are sharing their experience, strength, and hope and what they went through. And it's not just alcoholics in the back, which is good. There's drug addicts, there's all kinds of things. So reading the stories are good just to get yourself related with some of the original alcoholics and newer ones. But the first 164, that is the program of recovery. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left untouched in the course of revisions made for the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th editions. The section called the doctor's opinion has been kept intact, just as it was originally written in 1939 by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, our society's great medical benefactor. Definition of benefactor: one who freely gives. I venture to say without Dr. Silkworth, there wouldn't be AA. That's how important the doctor's opinion is. And that was Bill Wilson's personal doctor. He was the founder of Towns Hospital, where Bill Wilson spent a lot of time. And we'll get into that history as well. But a benefactor is one who freely gives. The 2nd edition added the appendices, the 12 traditions, and the directions for getting in touch with AA, but the chief change was in the section of personal stories, which was expanded to reflect the fellowship's growth. Bill's story, Dr. Bob's nightmare, and one other personal history from the 1st edition were retained intact. 3 were edited, and one of these was retitled. New versions of the 2 stories were written with new titles. 30 completely new stories were added, and the story section was divided into 3 parts under the same headings that are used now. In the 3rd edition, Pioneers of AA was left unchanged. 9 of the stories in Part 2 were carried over from the 2nd edition. 8 new stories were added. Part 3, they lost nearly all. 8 stories were retained. 5 new ones were added. So like I said, the stories in the back have changed, but the 12-step recovery process has not. This 4th edition includes the 12 concepts for the world service and revises the 3 sections of personal stories as follows. 1 new story has been added to Part 1, and 2 that originally appeared in Part 3 have been repositioned there. 6 stories have been deleted. 6 of the stories in Part 2 have been carried over, 11 new ones have been added, and 11 taken out. Part 3 now includes 12 new stories, 8 were removed, in addition to the 2 that were transferred to Part 1. All changes made over the years in the Big Book, AA members' fond name for this volume, have had the same purpose: to represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous more accurately and thereby to reach more alcoholics. I have the rest of this highlighted. If you have a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 42 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me, or more important, yes, I felt like that, or most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too. So, reading the first 164 pages by yourself, you can, but those are meant to work with another person with. The stories in the back you can read as much as you want, and it tells us to look for the not the differences, look for the similarities. So relate to those stories in the back of the book. Anything past 164, they're good resources to use. All right, forward to the 1st edition. There's a lot on this page. So right off the bat, I would highlight these first 2 sentences. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. So, a couple things. Whenever you see italicized words, they're trying to make a point. It's very important. When you see italicized words in this book, the authors are trying to tell you to pay attention. They use that word recovered twice in the first 2 sentences right off the bat. And there's a lot of people in the program you'll hear have a problem with that word. They'll say that they're never recovered. I'll always have this. But what did we just read? We're recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. Now there's a difference between recovered and cured. We'll get into cured when we get to step 10, but recovered is not picking up that first drink. If I'm going to stay recovered, I have to be in recovery. And what am I recovered from? A hopeless state of mind and body. We're going to study the body, the physical part. That's what happens when I take a drink or take a drug. But that hopeless state of mind, that's not going to go away just because we stop drinking or just because we stop using. That's going to take, the book says it's not an overnight matter. It's going to take some time. But it should give you hope that, the author of this book isn't one person. It's the first 100 alcoholics. Right off the bat, it's the first 100 alcoholics that wrote this book. They're all saying they've recovered from that hopeless state of mind and body. How do I stay recovered? I got to be in recovery. I'm not cured, and we'll study why I'm not, because I have an allergy. Whatever I put in my system, I can't stop, okay? I'm not cured of it. But am I recovered by not putting something in my body that harms me? Yes. And I get to recover from that hopeless state of mind and body. Because I don't know about you guys. When I wasn't drinking, I was constantly thinking about drinking. That's why I went back to drinking. That, it's called an obsession, and it wouldn't go away. No matter what I tried, it was always there. Always. No matter how many consequences I had, jail, institutions, near death, it was always still there. And they're telling me right off the bat, you can be recovered from that. So there's hope in there. Right from the right before page 1, there's hope in that. And you don't have to believe it. I didn't believe it. I was like, there's no, I'm 17 years. I've never not thought about taking a drink. I didn't think about taking a drink today. I'm thinking about it now because I'm talking about it, but it's not there. It's one of the biggest miracles you'll find in this program. And there's many of us here that know what I'm talking about. If it's there, it's fleeting. It's not there constantly 24/7. We get recovered from that. So there's hope in that. And it's real. Even if you don't believe it, it's real. For them, we hope these pages, is there any questions on recovered? Because you will hear people that have a problem with it in meetings. I introduce myself as a recovered alcoholic because I am. They're going to use that word 13, 14 times in this book. So, for them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experiences, notice it says experiences, not opinions, will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. I would highlight the rest of this paragraph. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. And besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. I would circle that word all. And I wrote right next to it, these steps can help anybody. Not just about alcohol. You can plug in marijuana. You can plug in overeating. You can plug in smoking. This 12-step recovery process has its advantages for all, which is a miracle. It is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals which may result from this publication. Being mostly business or professional folk, we cannot well carry on our occupations in such an event. I have this highlighted. We would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation. Avocation. You can talk. It's a hobby. Hobby? This dictionary, which is called the Little Big Book Dictionary, an activity taken up in addition to one's regular work or profession.
A hobby.
An activity taken up in addition to one's regular work or profession.
I have an activity that you do regularly for enjoyment rather than as a job. And I like that definition because you do get to where you actually enjoy this,
You do.
Seeing other people recover helps you.
Right on. Yep, it does. I wrote balance right next to that too, because we can tend to do too much of anything, and we'll really get into that. I wrote balance right next to it. Sometimes we can overwork ourselves, and sometimes we can do the same thing in recovery. Burnout.
Over AA yourself.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. When writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of our fellowship to omit his personal name, designating himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Today it's your call. It's up to you what you want to do. I make it known to everyone that I am a recovered alcoholic. That's just what I do, because it's safer for me that way. I'm not hiding anything, but everybody who knew me for 17 years, there was nothing to hide. I made it very clear I was an alcoholic, but I also make it very clear I'm a recovered alcoholic. And I've had a lot of people approach me because I make that known that need help. But it's your call. It's whatever you want to do. Very earnestly, we ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no fees or dues whatsoever. I have this highlighted. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking.
Third tradition.
Brando,
Yes.
I just realized that, 'cause it's the third tradition that we read off the wall all the time. But it says an honest desire to stop, but on every single, poster, it omits that word, why?
I know. They,
Why would
I have
that
it written
be?
here. They took it out to minimize controversy. So I guess there was controversy over that word, which amazes me because we're going to study that there's three things you have to have in order to recover: willingness, honesty, and an open mind. So I love that that's in there, and I love that we still have that original manuscript because that's what we read at our men's meeting. It's an honest desire. I can have a desire. Is it honest? Do I really want to stop drinking above everything?
So do you think they'll take that word out of the fifth edition? Do you think?
I don't know. I don't know.
I'd never noticed that.
Really? Okay. I'm glad it's there in the foreword. I really am. Because probably everybody can relate to me. If I wasn't 100% honest, wanting to stop drinking, I wasn't going to stop drinking. That's my experience with it. If I kept this little notion, and we'll read about that, this lurking notion of how I can get by this alcoholism thing, I was going to use it. I got to put my desire to stop drinking above everything when I first get here. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination, nor do we oppose anyone. I have this highlighted. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced work with other alcoholics. Underline that, as well as highlight it.
Which one?
Commenced work with other alcoholics. We're going to find out that is the core of recovery, is that sentence right there. We should like to be helpful to such cases. Inquiry by scientific, medical, and religious societies will be welcomed. Any questions on the forward to the first? All right, forward to the second. I wrote history right below that. There's a lot of good history in here. Figures given in this forward describe the fellowship as it was in 1955. Since the original forward to this book was written in 1939, highlight this, a wholesale miracle has taken place. Two important words. Wholesale.
Large quantity.
There it is. Performed on a large scale. Miracle. Love this word. Divine intervention in human affairs. Divine intervention in human affairs. Anybody see a miracle today? I'm looking at about 15, 20 miracles right here.
Right here.
Look in the mirror. Every single person in this room is a miracle. We're all sober today, right? Today? That's a miracle. Huge miracle. We're all here today. I don't care how much time you have. Us, being alcoholics, and we all have a past, and we all have that pain and suffering that we can relate to. May not be the same, but we can relate to it. We're all here sober today. That's a wholesale miracle. And the key also with this is when these first 100 alcoholics, when they started to do this work, it wasn't just one or two people getting sober. It was a wholesale miracle when people were doing the work directly right out of the book. Recovery was happening, and we're going to read about it. So it wasn't just, it took years and years and years for one person to sober up. That's not the way it was. A lot of people that were hopeless. And these alcoholics during this time, you either went to an insane asylum or died, or both. That was it. And ever since before 1939, that was your option if you were an alcoholic. You went insane and died, or both, until 1939. I never looked at it like that, Our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. Already, continues the early text, 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities. 16 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups. Circle that word, mushroomed. Definition is rapid growth. So similar to that word wholesale. Mushroomed is rapid growth.
Something like that, yeah.
So it mushroomed into 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000. What word is that? Recovered. Circle it. Highlight it.
You got that, Kyle?
He's got it. So in 16 years, there wasn't just a couple hundred. 150,000 recovered alcoholics because of this program, because of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the mushrooming process, the wholesale miracle that it's talking about. Groups are to be found in each of the United States and all provinces of Canada. AA has flourishing communities in the British Isles, the Scandinavian countries, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and U.S. possessions. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning, only the augury of a much larger future ahead. Augury, I have omen. Circle that word. Let's see what this dictionary says. You always like to get different sources, especially nowadays. Something that indicates future happenings. Augury.
It's kind of funny they mentioned Alaska and Hawaii because they weren't a state.
They weren't a state? Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And how many countries? 50. How many countries do we have total?
Countries?
Countries. 183 last I checked. You know how many AA is not in? 3. There is no excuse of not going to a meeting wherever you go on vacation. 0. One of them's Haiti. I don't know what the other 2 countries are. Maybe someone can look that up. But
North Korea.
I must say it's gotta be North Korea.
could be North Korea.
Did you say Augury was?
Augury is omen. I like this other definition from you.
Indicates future happenings.
There you go. Something that indicates future happenings. So they were just looking for a bright future, and they had no idea where it was going to reach. I have this whole next paragraph bracketed all the way to the top. And when I say bracketed, that means, you can highlight the whole thing, but that entire paragraph is important, and we're gonna spend some time on it. But starting with the spark, all the way to the top of the next page, at the end of dependence upon God, I have the whole thing bracketed. The spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck at Akron, Ohio in June 1935 during a talk between a New York stockbroker, that's Bill Wilson, and an Akron physician, that's Bob Smith. I have their sobriety dates here if you want them. Bill's sobriety date was 12/11/34. 12/11/34.
That's Bill.
That's Bill. Bob's was 6/10/35. And we still celebrate that birthday today called what?
610 what?
6/10/35. Founders Day. Still the same date.
I got it right.
Dr. Bob's sobriety date. So Bill's 12/11/34, Bob is 6/10/35. Six months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. Right next to friend, take an arrow and write down Ebby Thatcher. EBBYTHATCHER. Ebby Thatcher. Yep, next page, where it says alcoholic friend.
You highlighted on that, on this one to where?
Wait up, dependence on God.
The whole paragraph.
The whole paragraph, just bracket the whole thing.
Highlight it, bracket.
And you can still highlight at will, you can still underline at will. Mine is, I mean, here's,
Friend, it's like friend. Alcoholic friend.
so just that sentence alone is telling me, it says 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession. So he didn't know Bob until 6 months after he got sober. So I wonder what he was doing for 6 months. We'll find out. But just know that Bill Wilson was 6 months sober before he met Dr. Bob. That alcoholic friend is Ebby Thatcher. The Oxford groups were a Christian organization. AA has roots in Christianity. That's what, that they were a part of the Oxford groups before AA was even founded. He had also, everybody there? I don't want to, I start getting excited, I'll start reading fast. Welcome, by the way. Get a highlighter and a pen. Okay. He had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism, who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. From this doctor, this is very important, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. So Bill found out what alcoholism truly was from Dr. Silkworth, who specialized in alcoholism. How much success do you think Dr. Silkworth had? We'll get into a lot of it next week, but very, very little. That's why he's so important, because he was honest. He specialized in alcoholism at Towns Hospital and had very little success until he met Bill, who was a patient. Though he could not accept all the tenets, write the word ideas above tenets. Circle that word tenets. It means ideas. I like double checking with this one. Ideas accepted as true. So he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups. He was convinced of the need for moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, and the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God. So there's 6 steps there. Let's go back and label them. Need for moral inventory. What step is that? Step 4. So write number 4 above that. Confession of personality defects.
5.
Write number 5 above that. Restitution to those harmed.
9.
Write step 9. Helpfulness to others.
12.
Step 12. Necessity of what's belief in God.
3.
Step 2.
2. That's right. Yeah.
Dependence upon God is
3.
3.
Yeah. I got that mixed up here.
And I have labeled off to the side, these are the first steps that AA started with. And I want you to write down page 263. And let's go to page 263. What I love about this book is affirmations. It's kind of the way the Bible works. You'll read something, and then you'll read it again, and then you got to go back to it, but everything just kind of connects. 263.
6 steps.
Unless you have a 3rd edition. 3rd edition, it's page 292. 4th edition, it's page 263.
Spiritual experience?
It says he sold himself short.
He sold himself short. Your book may be all different. He's got one of those new fancy books.
I don't even go that high.
263?
He's got one of those, just a step books.
Oh, okay.
Print 164.
The blind people book?
We'll have to get you another one.
I said, man, I'm just.
It's okay. It's okay. This is just showing that you can write them right next to that column that we just went over. So it says step 1, complete deflation. Step 2, dependence and guidance from a higher power.
Anybody got an extra pen?
We got plenty. Yep. Three is moral inventory. And you can write those next to his book. 4 is confession. 5 is restitution. And 6 is continued work with other alcoholics. So those are the first, when Alcoholics Anonymous first started, before AA, they had 6 steps that were brought by the Oxford Groups, a Christian organization.
I'm gonna have to write that down.
You can get them. And and those steps is how they got started, and I just thank God that they added 6 more, because the key one is step 10 not being there. The key one is these sins, these defects of character, these trials, they're going to keep happening. They're not going to stop just because we stop drinking. Life is going to happen. Step 10 is a huge step where we know how to deal with them. They didn't have that there, so it's a miracle that, and we'll see how these 12 steps originated, but the alcoholics realized they needed more than just these 6. And the Oxford Groups, they had good intentions, but the tenets that they did not agree with were things like they made them dress up and wear ties. They wanted them to quit smoking. Tell an alcoholic to quit smoking who is a smoker when they get into sobriety. It's not a very smart idea. So they wanted to dictate to alcoholics what they thought they should do, and it just didn't work out. That's why they split up. But the roots were the roots were Christian. And they spend a lot of time in the book of James, and we'll get to that when it talks about faith without works is dead. But right now, just make sure you have page 263. Those are the first 6 steps. And again, like I said, thank God they added more. Prior to his journey to Akron, the broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory, I would highlight this, that only an alcoholic can help another alcoholic. But he had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. That sentence speaks volumes. He had a theory, it was only a theory, that only an alcoholic could help another alcoholic. So for 6 months, we just read that he before he met Dr. Bob, he was 6 months sober. He tried to help other alcoholics, and we're going to get more into it, but he tried to help other alcoholics for 6 months, and he was the only one that stayed sober. But it should tell you something. We can't keep anybody sober. We can't give anybody that willingness and honesty and an open mind. But if I try to help somebody, no matter if I'm a day, 2 days, 3 days, if I reach out to a guy that's a day and I'm 3 days, that guy may ask me, that's a day, how did I get 3 days? Your attempt, and Bill realized this early, before any AA, before any sponsorship, before anything, that his attempt to try to help another alcoholic kept him sober. That's why we stay sober today. So everybody in this room has that experience, strength, and hope to help another alcoholic. If you're here today sober, you have it. And that's a miracle. That's another miracle. We're going to go through a lot of miracles in here, but that's another one. That past, I always thought that my past was wasted time. I never wanted to go back to my past. I never wanted to revisit it. That past turns out to be one of the greatest assets you have. It can save somebody's life. So that's what he realized. He just thought it was a theory, but turned out to be one of the biggest, it's the core of AA. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. Highlight this. I have it highlighted, circled, and starred. He suddenly realized, in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician. And you can write Dr. Bob right next to that. For 6 months, he tried to carry the message that he found by that sudden spiritual awakening from God. Nobody stayed sober until he met Dr. Bob. This physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. So Dr. Bob, and we'll realize when we read his story in the back, he was born and raised with the Bible. He went to church all the time. He went to the Oxford groups all the time. He could not stay sober. I related to that. But when the broker, so Bill, gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue, highlight this at will, the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster.
What does malady mean?
Very good question. What is malady?
It is a fatal disease.
Fatal disease.
Fatal disease.
Another thing you'll hear in rooms, alcoholism isn't a disease. They use the word disease one time in the first 164 pages. They use this word malady 6 times in the first 164 pages. It means a fatal disease.
And if you look at disease as dis-ease of your mind, which is that mind and body, it creates disease within the body.
Very good.
So
Yep.
it is a disease.
It's a 3-part disease that we'll get to. We suffer spiritually, mentally, and physically. All 3. If you take one of those out, you're not describing alcoholism.
Brenda,
Yes.
if anyone has a problem like I did, I I hated calling it a disease, you know? Like I had a mental problem, but I didn't wanna call it a disease. If anybody else has a problem with that, it's better if you think of it as dis-ease,
That's what, yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Is that what you just said?
Yep.
I'm sorry.
No, no, that's good.
My mind is elsewhere, I'm sorry.
It's all good.
None.
It has
Anything
to
brought up
be
twice is
reworded.
important.
Exactly.
Yeah. It needed to be heard again. That's all that means.
Somebody needed to hear it a different way.
So, and what's remedy? Right before that word malady. So if malady is a fatal disease, what's a remedy?
Cure to the disease.
A treatment that cures a disease. Treatment that cures a disease is the definition for remedy. What kind of remedy?
Spiritual.
It says spiritual, doesn't it?
The treatment that cures disease.
Remedy.
So spiritual remedy, treatment that cures a disease, malady is a fatal disease. Don't let anybody tell you this alcoholism is not a disease. It absolutely is. And it affects us 3 ways.
Is it inherited?
I don't know. Somebody told me that science has actually proved that. I don't know. I know it runs in my family, going all the way as back as, you know, and I see a lot of heads nodding, you know, usually it does. I've had people in my family die from this. I had my uncle jump out of a window and commit suicide because of this.
Hereditary.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That gene, we haven't studied the physical allergy yet, but all alcoholics have a physical allergy. Is that inherited? I think it is.
See, and I'm a little bit different. Yeah, I'm a little bit different.
Yeah.
I think it's generational because a lot of us are raised by broken people, and broken people don't do well at raising healthy people. They raise broken people. So I personally think it's generational, which is why we're kind of born with it.
And I'm not going to disagree with that either. But
Makes sense.
yep,
Makes a lot of sense.
yep. So what? Another thing in that sentence I just read is he gave Dr. Bob Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism. So I wonder how important that is. Bill couldn't stop, yet he was sober here. He got a description of alcoholism from this Dr. Silkworth. He gave that description to Dr. Bob, and Dr. Bob heard hope. Dr. Bob was a doctor himself, and he heard hope. So do you think this Dr. Silkworth description of alcoholism is important? Mm-hmm. It's going to be one of the most important things. If you haven't learned it, it's going to be one of the most important things you'll ever learn. I was suffering, shaking with no answer, and all of a sudden when I heard that description from Dr. Silkworth, I saw hope. Still suffering, but I saw hope because I knew what I was up against. Most alcoholics and addicts don't know what they're up against. Dr. Silkworth will explain what we're up against. So I wrote, he heard hope right next to that. And then it says he sobered never to drink again up to the moment of his death in 1950. This seemed to prove, I would highlight at will, that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. Here's the important part. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. That is a promise. Thank you, Bill. Strenuous, with great effort and energy, vigorous, with great effort and energy, vigorous.
That vigorous nonstop.
Are we doing the seventh tradition?
Yes. Thank you. With great effort and energy, vigorous. Vital. They are going to use this word vital multiple times throughout this book. Necessary to the maintenance of life. Or necessary to the maintenance of life.
What word was that for?
Vital.
And necessary
essential.
Maintenance of life.
I like this word, life supporting. Indispensable. A little important. Is that sentence saying when someone comes up to me and they need help, just say, well, there's a meeting down the street, go to it? Is that strenuous work with another alcoholic? Most people I meet in recovery, that's their answer. You know, here's a schedule. You know, a guy comes in to a meeting and he's shaken, he's a day, he doesn't know what to do. Is sending him off to another meeting. Here's a meeting tomorrow. Tomorrow, I can't get through today. You know, that's where I was. I was trying every second not to drink. So if someone told me to go to a meeting, I was drinking that day. But strenuous work with another alcoholic, that's a little different. That's what we're all doing in here now. We're going through the book doing strenuous work. And when you guys are done with this, you'll be doing the same thing with another person. And that's not only important for us, it says it's vital to permanent recovery.
You got that, Matt?
Kyle.
So if vital is necessary to the maintenance of life, in order for me to live, I need strenuous work with another alcoholic. Does that make sense? If I'm going to live, I need to work with another alcoholic. Bill realized that very early in that first 6-month time frame.
I like what Bill said, nonstop.
You try to help someone and they disappear, does that mean you give up? No, you just go to the next one. There's plenty of people that are in and out. You know, I was one of them for years. Thank God someone said, let me go through the book with you, word for word, sentence for sentence. Hence the two men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Their very first case, a desperate one. What's this word again? Recovered. What is that, the fourth time? We're not even on page 1. Recovered. I always highlight it when I see it. Immediately and became AA number 3.
Bill D.
Bill D. You can write that right next to that.
Bill Dodson.
Bill Dotson. Dotson. D-A-T-S-O-N. He was a lawyer. You also notice, are these alcoholics, are they homeless people living under a bridge on a street? No. We got a stockbroker, we got a doctor, and now we got a lawyer. Those are the first 3 people in Alcoholics Anonymous. This disease affects everybody. Everybody. It can take you to the streets for sure. But write Bill Dotson, and he never had another drink. So the first 3 people in Alcoholics Anonymous, they stayed sober and died sober. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was one occasional heartening success. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935, the first AA group had actually been formed, though no one realized it at the time. So the first AA group, how many people?
3.
3. Isn't that awesome? A second small group promptly took shape at New York, to be followed in 1937 with the start of a third at Cleveland. And right next to that, you can write Clarence S. Clarence Schneider. Some of you may have heard of him. Clarence S. The Cleveland group. Besides these, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron or New York who were trying to form groups in other cities. I would highlight the rest of this paragraph. By late 1937, the number of members having substantial sobriety time behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic.
There's hope.
I wrote hope right next to that. Because like I said, before 1935, 1939, there was no hope. You were an alcoholic, you died. You lived usually a short and painful death. We have a solution today.
And then you highlighted, you said by the late 1937, right?
Mm-hmm.
Paragraph.
Yep. Okay. It was now time, the struggling groups thought, to place their message and unique experience before the world. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. So the first edition, 1939. The membership had then reached about 100 men and women. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. Fledgling, immature, underdeveloped.
Immature,
Yep.
underdeveloped?
Underdeveloped organization. Immature, underdeveloped organization. So these are the first 100 alcoholics that helped write this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and the longest one sober was 4 years. And we got this book from them. Pretty awesome. The flying blind period ended and AA entered a new phase of its pioneering time. With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, the noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval. In the fall of 1939, Fulton Ausler, the editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. This brought a rush of 800 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. They had one little office in New York, 800 letters coming in at once. Each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found to the astonishment of everyone, I have this highlighted, that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery. So 100 at the start, 800 at the end.
That little New York office was the first general service.
That's
office.
it. Thank you. You can write first service office. See, I've done over 40 of these, and I mean over 30 of these, and I didn't have that. You're always going to continue to add to this book as you keep doing it. In the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. News of this got on the world wires, inquiries poured in again, and many people went to the bookstores to get the book Alcoholics Anonymous. By March 1941, the membership had shot up to 2,000. Then Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in need of help really deluged us. Deluge. To flood or to overwhelm is the better word. To overwhelm. You can read about the history of that Rockefeller Jr. dinner. Outside issue, those were some evil people. They were very evil people. Thank God for Dr. Bob. Bill was a stockbroker. What's the first thing on his mind? He wanted to turn this thing into a money-making business. That's what he did. So God put Dr. Bob in his life for a reason. Absolutely.
Or the third tradition would be different.
If they even would have got to traditions. So there are definitely some interventions early on in recovery.
Real quick, did that basket come out there?
Oh, thank you. So we got deluged, overwhelmed. The mushrooming process was in full swing. AA had become a national institution. Our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this: could these large numbers of erstwhile erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? We barely can now.
What does erstwhile mean?
Erstwhile, in the past, formerly. But actually, there's millions of us now. Here, a few hundred.
What was the definition for erstwhile?
Erstwhile is in the past, formerly.
How come I got not of the normal kind?
That's why you keep coming back. Erratic, lack of consistency.
One,
Erstwhile is in the past or formerly.
in the past before me.
Yep. Erratic is lack of consistency. Unpredictable.
What's erstwhile in there?
That unpredictable. Alcoholics are great sprint runners, but we lack the distance. Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Would there be schisms which would split AA apart? Soon AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately.
Schisms.
What is schisms?
Divide, split.
The division.
And that hasn't stopped. It's still happening today. I think at probably the greatest pace I've ever seen in 15 years. There's division everywhere. Is today the 14th?
Yes.
So schisms, divide, split. And that last sentence highlighted, we had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. I wrote down, united we stand, divided we fall. They needed something for unity that was something other than the steps. So this next paragraph, you can bracket the whole thing, and you can label it the 12 traditions. Without these traditions, AA would not have unified, and they would have fell off the scene. So just label this whole paragraph, the 12 traditions. As we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to evolve principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society, that our leaders might serve but never govern, that each group was to be autonomous, and that means self-governing. And there was to be no professional class of therapy. There were to be no fees or dues. Our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions. There was to be the least possible organization, even in our service centers. Our public relations were to be based upon attraction rather than promotion. It was decided that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and films. And in no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter public controversies. This was the substance of AA's 12 traditions, which are stated in full on page 561 of this book. Anybody have a third edition? Or is it all four? Does everybody's book say 561?
Mine says
I got one
562.
book that says 561, and I got another one that says 562.
Okay. So does, okay. Close enough. Though none of these principles had the force of rules or laws, they had become so widely accepted by 1950 that they were confirmed by our first international conference held at Cleveland. Today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets that our society has. While the internal difficulties of our adolescent period were being ironed out, public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. For this, there were two principal reasons. The large numbers of recoveries and reunited homes. These made their impressions everywhere. All right, this is awesome. I wrote down statistical facts of the first alcoholics in recovery. Can't do the facts because there's millions of us today. Back then, they could do the facts of the first people in recovery. And it says of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once. Half. And they remained that way. Then 25% sobered up after some relapses. You don't find odds like that today. And among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program. But a great number of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed.
Brendo,
Yes.
you can see from what we just read how divinely inspired this program was, because those odds, like you said, they don't exist today. But if back then, it had been not so much success, like we have today, unfortunately. I don't know if this program would have thrived or took off, the way it did. So that was definitely God all the way.
It was. I guarantee it was eye-opening. Go
And
ahead.
you're right with that as far as not taking off, because prior to Bill and Bob, the Washingtonians had this success rate. But the traditions, they did not
didn't have,
have, and it caused them to crumble. And all the work that they did was kind of, taken away.
That's a great point. The Washingtonians didn't have the traditions. The Oxford groups didn't have the other 6 steps, especially step 10.
What was Washingtonians? I never
They
even heard
were
of that.
about 100 years before AA.
What were they like?
They were an AA group.
They were.
They were.
Oh wow, I never heard of that.
Yeah.
Huh.
I'll bring a book in.
It's a book.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a good read.
Thank you.
Another reason for the wide acceptance of AA was the ministration of friends in medicine, religion, and the press, together with innumerable others who became our able and persistent advocates. Without such support, AA could have made only the slowest progress. Some of the recommendations of AA's early medical and religious friends will be found further on in this book. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religious organization, neither does AA take any particular medical point of view, though we cooperate widely with the men of medicine as well as the men of religion. I have this highlighted. Alcohol being no respecter of persons. We are an accurate cross-section of America and in distant lands by the same democratic evening up process is now going on. By personal religious affiliation, we include Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and a sprinkling of Muslims and Buddhists. More than 15% of us are women. All inclusive. Everybody's invited. That's the good thing. I think that's a great thing.
I'd be curious to know that percentage of women these days.
I guarantee it's higher now, for sure. Yeah.
Higher, yes, of
Yeah.
course, but
But initially, 15%. Yeah.
And I think that had a lot to do with, in the beginning, women were not really welcomed in.
Right. The way they were
because
treated.
The wives were terrified. So,
At present, our membership is pyramiding at the rate of about 20% a year. So far, upon the total problem of several million actual and potential alcoholics in the world, we have made only a scratch. In all probability, we shall never be able to touch more than a fair fraction of the alcohol problem in all its ramifications. Upon therapy for the alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly. And I have the rest of this paragraph highlighted. Yet it is our great hope that all those who have not yet found an answer may begin to find one in the pages of this book. and will presently join us on the high road to a new freedom.
Promise.
That is a promise. When we say promise, you know, most people are familiar with the 9th step promises that are read at almost all the meetings, you know. Those aren't the only promises. There's over 220 promises in this book. Not all good, but this one's a good one. You notice how it says, where's the answer? The pages of this book. I used to have a stack of books. I used to try to read bits and pieces of everything, you know. I couldn't stay sober. It's telling me, especially if you're new, all I need is this book, and I can't do it alone. Next week, we'll touch a little bit on the 3rd or the 4th. We're not going to spend much time on those, but the doctor's opinion, like I said, it's one of the most important. Can't even call it. I mean, it's before page 1, but it's the most important letters we have in this book. I mean, he is going to tell us exactly what our problem is. And a lot of what he says, you don't hear it in meetings. I didn't, you know, and I was listening. I was really trying to understand why I could not get this obsession out of my head. And we're gonna really get into step 1 next week. So I'll stop this.